What would happen if LEGO or Disney decide to cancel their Star Wars licensing agreement in 2032?
Okay, so why 2032? A collaboration between two colossal companies doesn't come without extensive delegation of Disney's IP. For those of you who haven't really explored the legal side of how companies collaborate, they often negotiate fixed terms for holding a temporary ownership of a license. In this case, because Disney is the owner of the Star Wars property, they can choose to lease out the IP to other brands to create toys, merchandise, and various media. These contracts are typically set at fixed terms because it gives both sides leverage to negotiate the royalties, rules surrounding what they can do with the license, and set guidelines for how involved both companies would be throughout its production and marketing. During one of these routine negotiations in April of 2022, LEGO would secure its third renewal for the Star Wars license from Disney, retaining an extension until 2032. As 2032 approaches ever so slowly, both companies will be assessing their positions. I don't think the question about the circumstances surrounding the theme's cancellation would be as clear-cut as you might think. There's so many potential factors that could be put into play as to why this discussion would ever be taking place. To be completely clear, before delving deep into what a world without LEGO Star Wars would look like, I'm not saying that 2032 will be the exact year that negotiations would fail, but that at some point in the future, it's very possible that we'd hit one of two different scenarios. If LEGO chooses to end the partnership, it might be because the Star Wars license no longer holds the same value for them. This scenario could occur if Disney decides to put the Star Wars franchise on hiatus by refraining from producing new content. The amount of TV shows and media created on a single piece of intellectual property is finite. It is inevitable that Star Wars will exhaustively run out of new concepts or stories to tell. Maybe in the distant future, Star Wars will not hold as much of a cultural impact as it does today. While it is only a minor impact for now, in recent times, Star Wars fans are starting to face a content fatigue. Similar to how Marvel fans are receiving too much content, a lot of the hype for recent media has gradually started to dive. Disney terminates the partnership because LEGO's relevancy as a company is declining. Such a decision could arise if there's a lack of engagement or enthusiasm in the toys from their core audience. This trend isn't isolated. Other toy giants like Hasbro and Mattel have recently witnessed significant financial setbacks. A lot of today's children are consuming more digital-based media, like interacting with video games and watching or sharing content online. Today's toy companies are battling a challenging and ever-changing landscape ahead of them to remain relevant and profitable. LEGO is no exception, as their recent focus on the adult community might indicate that they are shifting market strategies, aiming to cater to more adult fans in expectation that their core audience is starting to skew from younger children to older collectors. This is indicative of product packaging, pricing, and recent advertising campaigns. Having examined the potential challenges in the LEGO Star Wars partnership, it isn't even a question that this would see problems into the LEGO aftermarket should Star Wars sets be discontinued. It's important to understand the context of how the partnership would cease though. If the Star Wars property is still regarded highly by the public, we'd see a sudden increase in the demand of Star Wars sets the moment that LEGO officially reveals the retirement of the theme. Without production matching this demand though, we'd immediately feel the effects of retailer stock depleting rapidly after the theme's retirement. Existing items on shelves would very likely have a shortened exit date, making the sets more rare than they were predicted to be based on their intended shelf life. We haven't even touched on the rippling effects that this would have across the retired Star Wars set portfolio. We might see a severe drought in more coveted sets, increasing their value more dramatically than the more commonly distributed sets. More specifically, I don't think that battle packs or lower price sets would be affected as much as the higher tier UCS sets. It's just a question of how likely it would be for the average collector to have troves of the same set. It further complicates things even more that due to the nature of LEGO pieces being so universal, I'd wager that sets without minifigures would remain largely unaffected by the theme's retirement. We live in a minifigure-driven economy, especially with LEGO Star Wars, where more than half of the value of a set is just based on the minifigures alone. Speaking of minifigures, it's very possible that custom and third-party brands could take over the demand for LEGO Star Wars figures by storm. We already have very successful custom creators who have streamlined the production process for creating unofficial designs on genuine LEGO pieces. This variable could swing the aftermarket completely, leading to an increased demand for third parties creating custom minifigures of well-known or new Star Wars characters. It's entirely possible that these custom shops may also increase their prices because they no longer have to compete with official prices and designs by LEGO, since the theme would no longer be actively supported by the LEGO Group. I also don't anticipate that the value of all sets would universally increase due to the theme's retirement. It's more probable that there would be a temporary market shift that would lead to a sudden jump in set prices, after which it would stabilize and continue to appreciate in value at a rate similar to if the theme had never been retired. Although this is all assuming that the Star Wars name is still highly regarded, and that Disney underestimated how much this decision would impact its own fan base. If LEGO was responsible for terminating the partnership because the property doesn't have as much of an influence as it used to, we'd be seeing a completely different end to the story. Chances are, if it ever got to this point, retired sets in the portfolio would have already seen a massive decline in value over time, because devaluations of intellectual property is a slow burn, something that's almost unobservable if you strictly compare its performance just year by year. If this were to happen though, I don't think that it would be happening as early as 2032. It would have to be because of a completely different IP overshadowing the success of Star Wars. It would have to be either an original theme or yet another IP acquisition that would be phenomenally in higher demand than Star Wars. However, I'd like to remind you all that this is purely based on speculation. Without going into too much detail about the exact specifics of why Star Wars itself might remain influential well into the next century, Lucasfilms and Disney have already shifted away from relying on the main 9 Star Wars films to effectively captivate audiences with their storytelling. New Star Wars media can be almost considered standalone. You don't really need to know everything about Star Wars to truly enjoy it. My theory solely relies on the inevitable truth that no matter how big any piece of media may become, it will eventually lose its audience and its fan base over time. It's a gradual collapse, a slow burn that leads to the defeat of a beloved property. My video aims to predict what a future without LEGO Star Wars would look like, no matter how improbable it might be. There's many other ways that the theme could get cancelled than what I've talked about, but I've tried to touch upon and explain the most likely scenarios that would lead to the cancellation of the theme. Of course, as a Star Wars fan myself, I'd hate to see the theme be shelved, but it's an interesting topic to debate. It's not about why the theme might get cancelled, but rather what would happen if it were cancelled.
This has been BrickFleet. I'll see you guys in the next video.